cost of living. No matter who you are or where you live, it's been a big topic of conversation recently. Household bills, fuel, even the 99p cheeseburger, which I suppose isn't a 99p cheeseburger anymore, have succumbed to rising costs. Car prices certainly haven't strayed from this trend either, with them being more expensive than ever. And unfortunately, it looks like this isn't going to slow down anytime soon. I mean, just take this for an example. Adjusted for inflation, the cheapest BMW 3 Series of the last generation started at just shy of £30,000. And now, if you want to get the entry-level model, it's £39,000.
So, what if I told you that in 2023, you could have a car for less than £1,000? Well, this is a 2005 Golf. And I paid 650 quid for it, total. But just because I did, does that mean you should too? Let's find out. So, why should you buy a car for less than £1,000? Well, let's start with the obvious. Cheap. This car cost me £250, and on the road it ended up being about 650. So, hard to argue with something like that. Another thing as well is when you're spending big money on a car, you care about it. You care about things like the paint. You care about things like if something goes wrong, or if someone hits it, especially if you're street parked. But something like this, doesn't matter. You can bump into whatever you like, and you're never going to care. That's why they're called bumpers. A triple digit car like this as well also means that you can save money on the things that you love. Maybe you're into cycling, maybe you ride a motorbike, or maybe like me, you've got a second car. I own a MX-5 that I drive on the weekends. And having this means that I can take care of the thing that I love, but save a little bit of money when I don't need to drive it, or have something a bit more comfortable and keep the miles off it, or something like that. So, servicing. When you're servicing a car that's as cheap as, well, triple figures, it means that you can buy things that are less expensive. So you can buy the less expensive oil, or you can buy the less expensive filter, or you can buy the cheap tyres. Because you don't really mind or care about it, and all it's there for really is to just serve a purpose of getting from A to B, you don't need to splash out on all the expensive stuff, and chances are, depending on how long you're keeping the car, it could be a year, it could be a couple of years, depends how long it lasts or how long you keep it. Things like that don't really matter, and in the long run, your servicing and running costs are cheaper. Obviously, on a regular car, I would never recommend doing this, but in the case of a cheap car, it doesn't really matter. Of course, make sure you still service your car though, because it is important. Okay, so a counter argument to the cheap car could be that financing has become very good nowadays. It's mostly the norm. There's obviously a lot of different kinds of financing, but I suppose the most comparable or the competitor to this would be leasing, as it's the cheapest and also the most detached from the vehicle, as you don't technically own it. However, the advantages of outright owning your car can be more. For example, in some cases, owning your own vehicle can make your insurance cheaper. It can also mean that you're not locked into a contract, like with a phone, for example. So if you decided that you wanted to chop or change your car, you can do so really easily by selling or scrapping your existing car and just going and buying another one, instead of having to wait for a contract to end or waiting for a clause in it to buy something else. It can also mean that with a cheap car, it doesn't matter if you bump a couple of things if you own it, because if you don't care, then it doesn't matter. A few extra scratches here and there, what gives? But with a car that's financed, although they will cover servicing costs and with a warranty, the repair costs, if there's anything down to negligence like bumping something or getting a scratch on the car, that unfortunately will not be covered and will have to come out of your own pocket. Either that, or when you hand the car back at the end of the agreement, it will come out of the final value of the car. So you'll have to think about things like that with a finance car, whereas with one that you own, not a problem. Another thing as well is that if you have a car that's a bit beat up, a bit ratty, it means that who's going to steal it? They're going to take one look at it and think, not worth my time. And even if it does get stolen, what gives?
you're probably a couple of £100, £500 out maybe. That's less than the latest smartphone. It's that cheap.
I mean, at the end of the day, for most people, a car is the second most expensive thing you'll ever buy. And making that purchase as cheap as possible might help for a house deposit. It could help for any number of things. As long as you haven't invested a significant amount of money in it, then the concept of the cheap car remains. And you don't have to worry about it. There'll be a plethora of options out there for you, whether it's just selling it on, or scrapping it, or stripping it. That's where the stress-free nature of it comes in, because there's no situation where you truly lose. So, I've gone over the pros, but now I've got to go over the cons. But before that, I know you're dying to hear about the specs on this bad boy. So let me run through it with you. We've got 2.0. So you know in America you got your 6 litres. This right here, this is the UK version of a Hellcat. Alright, if we come around here, I'll pop the hood. Show you what lies beneath. Well, it was always going to be too good for us mere mortals anyway, so. Okay, so back to the cons, and I'm sure you've guessed it already, but if you're spending such a little sum on a car, you're going to have to expect it to be a little bit tatty. You're not going to get the best example of a car in the world, it's just a fact, but it comes with the territory. If you're spending triple figures on a car, you should expect it. On top of that, you're not going to have a lot of freedom of choice. Just because I have a 2-litre TDI Mark V Golf for £650 doesn't mean there'll be one out there right now for a similar price. Things just sort of come up when they come up, and you just got to make the most of an opportunity when you can. But who knows, maybe there is one. Alright, so another big issue with a cheap car is that, well, you either have an MOT or you don't. This one, although I said it was £650, that is not just the total cost of the car. That was buying the car, which was £275 from a friend, and then all of the extra money out of £650 was getting this thing ready for an MOT because it didn't have one when I bought it. So if you're spending closer to the £1,000 mark, you're more likely to get a car with an MOT. But like I said, you should probably expect something that might have some issues that need rectifying, a couple of leaks here and there, maybe a service as well that it needs, and of course the MOT. You might need to get your hands a little bit dirty if you're spending that much money. Unfortunately, the list doesn't end there. Although I mentioned before that a lease deal can tie you in and give you less freedom when buying another car, well, it can also be quite good value at the end of the day, and for some people they'll get a newer car, something that maybe be a bit more economical, a bit cheaper for them to run, and also they don't have the attachment of actually owning a car and having to deal with the expenses. A manufacturer or a dealer will obviously deal with any repairs, just like a landlord for a house if you lease a car. And also, with more stringent policies coming in cities, it might be harder to drive a car like this around, whereas something new, 22 plate car, little Yaris or something, you'll be able to drive those around a city for many years to come. So you got to consider that.
Okay, so I've laid the groundwork, I've told you the good parts and the bad parts, and you've made your decision. You want a car for less than £1,000. So, how'd you buy one? Okay, so first and foremost, you got your obvious ones like Auto Trader and Facebook Marketplace and eBay. Those are all the usual places where people buy cars. Auto Trader, you might have a bit higher quality because they have to pay to get the adverts on, but then you're probably more likely to find a bargain on somewhere like Facebook Marketplace or eBay, as they're free second-hand selling sites. But I would suggest that if you can, you should probably try and break the mold a little bit, go for some different options. So, for example, sometimes garages will have cars for very cheap. Another thing as well is maybe you got a friend. So in my case, I had a friend who was scrapping his car, and I went up to him and I was like, can I buy it for scrap money? And he was like, well, doesn't make a difference to me, so sure. And that's how I got my car cheap. But there are plenty of options out there. You just gotta stay patient, be vigilant, and try and wait for the right deal to come to you. Okay, so you found the car that you want at a price that's good. What should you do next? Well, if the car already has an MOT, then that's a really good starting point. However, you should still do some pre-purchase inspections. Don't buy sight unseen, because the car could just be a ticking time bomb. As much as it is a really cheap car, you don't want to end up with a driveway ornament that's just sitting there after a month because the engine blew up. I could tell you what checks you need to do for a used car, but there are plenty of videos out there on what you should look out for in a used car, so research, look online, and there'll be plenty of stuff out there for you to make sure you know what you're looking for. Now, if your car doesn't have an MOT, it's a little bit of a different story. So, what you're going to need to do is, you're going to need to have a look at that list, go on the government website, there's a free MOT checker on the government website, just type in MOT check, it'll be one of the first results, and put in the reg of the car, have a look. See what it failed on, see what the advisories are, see if those advisories could get worse, and see if those things that it failed on are absolutely detrimental and really expensive to repair. So, for example, if it fails on stuff like tyres or brakes, really easy and really cheap to repair, so that's good. But if it's something more like serious corrosion, might be worth avoiding depending on how long you want to keep the car. As long as the fixes for an MOT are quick, easy and cheap, then you're all good. When you're choosing the model of car you want to buy, make sure you choose something that doesn't have a lot of common reliability problems. Cars under £1,000 are cheap for a reason. On the one side, it's usually because the car's undesirable and they made a lot of them, so people don't really want them and they're not worth as much. But on the other side of it, they're cheap because they're unreliable and they're expensive to repair. So make sure that you're on that first side of it being slightly undesirable rather than the unreliable side, because it's just going to be expensive and a pain in your ass. Once you've picked your model as well, do the research. Every car will have small issues, so make sure you know what those issues are so you can either prevent them or see how much they are to repair if you're buying a car that's already had the issue afflicted. Most importantly, make sure you do your research on the running costs. It's not just about the purchase price of the car, it'll be about how much the tax is, how much the insurance is, how fuel efficient it is, how much the servicing is, and how much repairs are going to cost for parts. Make sure you do your research on those things and that it's still within your budget. As long as you follow all of those steps and it ticks all of those boxes, then you're good to go.
So, in conclusion, should you buy a car for less than £1,000? Well, I've given you all the information here, and in my opinion, and in my personal situation, it does. It does make sense. I think that I've done the maths, and just owning my MX-5, having an extra car like that, actually makes things cheaper for me. So it's an absolute no-brainer. Why wouldn't I? But for you, things might be different. If you walk to work, for example, or cycle, then that's already a nil cost there. There's no miles happening on a car, and there's no fuel being spent on. So what's the point? It really depends on your personal situation. So really, it's your choice. That's me out. See you later. £1,000 and I'll be like, this is my shit car.
Is there a car coming?
No.
I think there is, mate.
Unfortunately, the list doesn't end there. Okay, So I've gone over the prawns